Now let's begin chapter 11. Now our goal with this chapter is going to begin to try to understand firms' decision making. What is their decision making process? Most of you guys are going into businesses. You're not going to be analyzing individual choice. So this more matches your focus, and hopefully it'll be more applicable for your career. And this is the sort of stuff that you'll be able to use when you're out there in the business world. So the question, what is the point of a firm? So this is a picture from an episode of It's Always Sunny. And there's a quote that of one of the characters asking Danny DeVito's character. So he says, "What does Atwater, the company they're working for, what do they make?" He says, "What do you mean? Like, how much money does the company make?" Travis says, "No, like, what do we make?" Frank again says, "I don't follow. We make money." The entire time he thought, and the way he operates is that the point of the firm is to maximize the return for their shareholder. It's to make as much money as possible, which is true. But how do they make that money? What is the process? How do they figure out what goods to produce and how much of those goods to produce? And that's what we're going to explore in this chapter. So the basic activity of a firm is to use inputs to produce outputs in goods or services. Now these inputs can be workers, they can be machines, they can be natural resources, they can be quite a few different things. An input is basically whatever the firm uses to produce the products. And we call the process by which a firm does this technology. A technology literally is the process by which a firm creates goods or services. Now, if a firm improves its ability to change inputs into outputs, we refer to this as a technological change. In this case, it's a positive technological change because the firm's getting better. Positive technological change is increasing the amount of output that's being produced for a given level of inputs. It can be thought of as productivity gains, as firms becoming more productive. Now, an example of productivity gain is Frankie's. Frankie's, changed their technology. They changed up the layout of the restaurants, the foods they offered, how they made those firms, how they made that food. They have a now better process for handling orders. For those of you that ate at the old Frankie's, no longer takes 20-25 minutes to get your cheesy breadstick. So this is a great positive technological change. Another example that your text gives is UPS delivering packages. So in 2013, leading up to the Christmas holiday that year, UPS was late delivering millions of packages. So to correct this in following years, UPS could do a couple things. They could hire more workers, or they could purchase more capital, more machinery, like airplanes or newer sorting technologies. UPS decided that to improve technology and make its workers more efficient. They use new scanner self-sorting and better maps and routing for delivery drivers. Now we need to separate time into two periods when we're looking at production costs. We separate the short run and the long run. Now, I'm sure you can imagine what the short run and long run mean, but in economics, we're going to have very precise definitions. So the short run is a period of time in which at least one of the firm's inputs is fixed. So if a firm has a very long-term lease on a factory that's too costly to get out of, they'll be operating in the short run because you're unable to change at least that one major input. Now in the long run, a firm can vary all of its inputs. It can adopt new technology, it can increase or decrease the size of its physical plant, it can do anything it wants to change the inputs that are being used. So now just how long is the long run? This varies between firms. So just think of it as a long enough period of time that anything can be changed in their production. So by splitting time up into two periods, that gives us different types of costs. So the first are variable costs. These are costs that change as output changes. So wages, cost of electricity, raw materials, shipping cost, all of these are going to be different if the level of production is different. Next are fixed costs. These are costs that remain constant as output changes. So this typically includes things like rental costs, insurance, advertising, things that are not involved in the production process. So all costs can be classified as either fixed or variable cost. So then the total cost of a firm is going to be their fixed cost plus their variable cost. So now for an example, let's take the fictional company Frank's Fluids. So Frank's Fluids is a beverage company that turns inputs, so intellectual property, labor, bottling and canning machines, sugar, crow eggs, the factory, electricity, and many other things into its output, which are beverages. So as it increases the number of drinks that it bottles, some of those inputs are going to stay constant and some will rise. So some of the things like labor, bottling and canning machines, electricity, crow eggs, sugar, these are going to change. They're going to increase as the number of drinks they make increase. But some of them, the factory itself, the intellectual property, these are not going to change as they increase the number of drinks that they make. So now remember we said that individuals face opportunity costs. Well, firms also face opportunity costs. They don't only face the cost of the money that they actually spend, but things that they could be spending money on, just like individuals. So explicit costs, these are costs that actually involve spending money. These are the tangible things that firms are spending their money on. The implicit cost is a non-monetary opportunity cost. It's important to remember that firms face both of these costs. So the explicit costs of running a firm are relatively easy for us to identify. Just look at what the firm spends money on. You can look at their balance sheet and see. The implicit costs are a little bit harder. Finding them involves identifying the resources used in a firm that could have been used for another beneficial purpose. So think, if you own your own company, you probably spend time working on the firm's activities. Even if you didn't, actually pay yourself explicitly for that time, it's still an opportunity cost. You could have been doing other things with that time. Let's go through an example. This example isn't going to be funny. I'm not going to be able to use an office reference because recreating all these slides, all the charts on them are going to take way too long because these are all photographs. So that'd be a long. So now let's look at Jill Johnson creating a pizza shop. So let's say she opens up her pizza store in Loretto. She's the one who owns the new pizza shop. Now, in this example, Jill quits her job of $30,000 to open up this pizza store. And then she takes $50,000 of her own savings and buys equipment, furniture, etc. And then she takes out a loan. Now, the items in red in the figure above are going to be the explicit costs. These things like pizza dough, all the ingredients, the wages that she's going to pay her employees, the interest payments on the loan to buy pizza oven, electricity for the pizza shop, and the lease payment for the store. These are all things she's physically spending money on. Now, the items in blue are going to be her implicit costs. So her foregone salary, the interest that the money that she earned, or the interest that she could have earned if she had kept the $50,000 in her savings, and the economic depreciation, the decrease in the resale value on the capital items that Jill buy. So because if she, sells those pizza ovens later, because they're used, she can sell them for a lower price. So that the depreciation is that it falls under the implicit cost. So even though these implicit costs don't require Jill actually laying down the money, actually paying people the money, she's not like Randy Moss paying in straight cash only. All these implicit costs are real costs. Jill still faces these from owning the pizza store. So implicit costs also should include other jobs she could have taken and the salary she can make for those jobs, or the other businesses she could have run. So she could have started her own high-end shoe company, Shoe La La. She could have sold industrial strength vacuum cleaners for the home. Maybe call it Suck It. Maybe a safer grill, the magic no ouchie meat machine. All these different things she could have sold. These can be considered implicit costs as well. And notice in particular on the previous slide, Jill charging herself for the money she took out of her savings, just like a bank would charge her for the loan. So these are also considered implicit costs. Let's look at the production in Jill's pizza shop. So Jill's restaurant turns its inputs, so pizza oven, the ingredients for the pizza, labor, electricity, all these things into pizza for sale. So to make this analysis simple, let's only consider 2 inputs. Even though there's a lot more inputs, the more we include, the more we think about right now, the murkier things are going to get. So if we use 2, it'll be very simple. So we'll look at pizza ovens and workers. The pizza ovens will be a fixed cost. We assume that Jill cannot change in the short run the number of ovens she has. Obviously, she can go out and buy another oven, but we're going to say because of the high cost for her just opening up her shop, she's stuck with what she has for the time being. Now, workers are going to be a variable cost, so we will assume that Jill can easily change the number of workers that she hires, that it's easy enough for her to go out and get another worker, that she can change these in the short run. So here we have a table with the short run production and the costs at Jill Johnson's restaurant. As you can see, the number of workers can vary from 0 to 6, but the quantity of pizza ovens, these are not going to vary at all. So Jill Johnson's restaurant has a particular technology by which it transforms workers and pizza ovens into pizzas. And with more workers, Jill can produce more pizzas. So this is the firm's primary function in this case. There's a relationship between the inputs employed, so in this case the workers and the pizza ovens, and the maximum output from those inputs. As you can see, in the third column, the quantity of pizzas per week increases as Jill hires more workers. But the cost of the pizza ovens, these are going to stay the same. Meanwhile, the cost of the workers, because these are variable costs, they'll increase as she hires more workers. From there, we can find the total cost of pizzas per week and the cost per pizza, so the average total cost. And we'll explore these more in the next slide. Each pizza oven costs $400 per week, and each worker is going to cost $650 per week. Because she has 2 pizza ovens, that's $800 in fixed costs that her firm has. So no matter how many pizzas they produce, even if they produce none, it's going to cost them $800 per week. Then every time they add a new employee, it's going to cost an additional $650. So those variable costs are going to increase as they produce more pizzas. Just like how we used the supply and demand schedule in order to create the supply and demand curves, we can use the total cost and the average total cost from the previous slide, from the table there, to graph the cost for Jill Johnson's restaurant. So on the right here, we have the total cost of producing pizzas per week for Jill Johnson's restaurant. I noticed that because we have a fixed cost, because we have those $800 worth of pizza ovens, the cost is not 0 when the quantity is 0. Now naturally, as Jill wants to make more pizzas, she has to hire more workers, and it's going to increase the cost of her producing the pizzas. Now, if we divide the total cost of pizzas by the number of pizzas produced, we can get the average total cost of pizzas. So now for low levels of production, the average cost falls as the number of pizzas rises. But then at higher levels, the average cost is going to rise as the number of pizzas rises. Early on, it will be easy to produce more pizzas and to do so cheaply, so the average cost for pizza is going to fall. But over time, especially because in this case, the pizza ovens are fixed, that quantity is fixed in the short run, it will become more and more costly. Each individual worker is going to be producing fewer pizzas, so now the average total cost is going to begin increasing again once you pass a certain number of workers. Because the average total cost falls initially and then rises as the number of workers then begins to increase, this results in the U-shaped average total cost curve. So our next task, we're going to begin examining why we get this shape for the average total cost curve, why we see this U-shaped average total cost curve. So now let's think through of how Jill's pizza shop is going to create pizzas with the number of employees they have, how they're going to transform these inputs into pizzas. So suppose Jill hires just one worker. That worker has to take orders, they have to make and cook the pizzas, take the pizza to the table, run the cash register, and you basically do everything there. So by hiring one additional worker, these tasks can be divided up, allowing for some specialization to take place, resulting from the division of labor. So one can say take orders and take the pizzas to the table. The other can make and cook the pizzas and run the cash register. And because they're just focusing on a smaller subset of responsibilities, over time they become more productive at those because they're doing the one thing over and over again. Now, 2 workers can probably produce more output per worker than 1 worker alone can do because they have this other person helping them out and they're becoming more skilled at their individual tasks as they're dividing it up. Now let's look what happens when Jill hires even more workers. So to think about this, consider the marginal product. Marginal product of labor is the additional output from hiring an additional worker. Remember, marginal equals the next unit. So in this case, it's the additional production being caused by an additional worker being hired. So when Jill moves from 0 workers to 1 worker, we go from 0 pizzas to 200 pizzas. So that first worker has a marginal product of labor of 200. They're now able to produce 200 more than they were before because of this additional worker. Moving from 1 workers to 2 workers, the number of pizzas being produced increases from 200 to 450. So the marginal product of labor, the difference between one worker and two workers, is 250. So the second worker has an even greater marginal product of labor. But now if we move from 2 workers to 3 workers, the quantity of pizzas being produced will increase from 450 to 550. Because it's only increasing by 100, the marginal product of labor of that third worker is only 100 pizzas. And you can see as we go on from 4 to 5 to 6, the marginal product of labor is going to continue to decrease. We see as we hire more and more workers, they're not increasing the potential output by as much as the initial early on workers. Eventually, they start getting in each other's way. There's only so many pizza ovens there, so you can only cook so many pizzas at the same time. There's only so many cash registers, only so many things to do. So once you get enough workers to actually run everything, you're going to see them producing less and less because of these additional workers that are coming. It's called the law of diminishing returns. At some point, adding more of a variable input, it could be labor, it could be anything else, any other variable input, to the same amount of a fixed input. So think of capital like the pizza oven, will cause the marginal product of that variable input to decline. So in this case, as we add more and more laborers with the same amount of pizza ovens, the marginal product of labor is going to decline. That's not just true for workers in the pizza industry, that's true for any firm. We graph the output against the marginal product against the number of workers, we can see the law of diminishing returns more clearly. We can see it actually happen. So at first, the top figure, the more workers are hired, the increase in output grows. At first, sharply, and then the growth slows down as it goes on. So the marginal product of labor is decreasing, but it's still positive. So total output is going to increase just at a slower rate than it was initially, which you can capture pretty well, you can imagine pretty well from the first figure. Now the second figure graphs the marginal product. So we're seeing the marginal product of labor. You can see the initial increase from 1 to 2 workers, and then you see it dropping as we add additional workers. So you can actually see the marginal product of labor getting smaller. Another way to look at output is finding the average product of labor. Looking at total output divided by the number of workers. If we have 3 workers producing 550 pieces, the average product of labor is going to be 550 divided by 3, so that equals 183.3. You can also think of it as the average of the marginal product of labor. So if worker 1 produces 200, worker 2 produces 250, and worker 3 produces 100, add those up and divide that number by 3. And again, you're going to get 183.3. We look at the average product of labor for 2 workers in this case, you can see it's 225. It's 200 plus 250 divided by 2, 225. It's greater than 183.3. So when we have 2 workers, the average product of labor is greater than average product of labor when we have 3 workers. So this is another way to illustrate the law of diminishing returns, because this third worker decreases the average product of labor. Again, with only 2 workers, the average product of labor was 225. So third worker is making that average go down. So, like I said, this is just another way that we can highlight the marginal product. You can see the law of diminishing returns by using this. So we can use another, somewhat similar example, something that may be a little bit more applicable for you guys to understand marginal and average. So now let's look at, I'll call it student Paul. So his semester GPA starts out pretty poorly, and then rises over the years, and then drops his senior year as he's having too much fun with his friends. So his cumulative GPA follows his semester GPA upward, as long as the semester GPA is higher than the cumulative GPA. So we see spring 2017, his GPA that semester starts to fall a little bit. It hit its peak and now it's going down a little bit. But because it's still higher than the cumulative GPA, it's still increasing his overall GPA. When his semester GPA dips below the cumulative GPA also starts to head down. So in spring 2018, when he does the worst he's done in a couple of years, that ends up slightly decreasing his cumulative GPA. Now it's the same basic idea when we're talking about the marginal and the average product of labor. If the marginal product of labor of the next worker is higher than the average product of labor, it's going to increase the average product of labor. If the marginal product of labor is lower than the average product of labor, then it's going to decrease the average product of labor. So each worker that is below the marginal product of labor, what they're bringing to the table, how many more units of goods they can produce. If it's lower than what the average product of labor is, then it's going to decrease the average product of labor. So that worker is going to be helping them produce fewer goods per worker. So that's an example of the diminishing returns.